What are the most important critiques that you would have on the intervention and on the post-conflict peace-building effort in Bosnia, and what do you think have they gotten right, if you will?
These are huge questions. I think that in terms of political economy, first of all, there was a lot of emphasis on getting the neoliberal agenda established and assuming that most of what the state had done was very badly flawed. Well, it was in many respects flawed, but insufficient attention to the issue of employment, I think, was one of the things that should have been considered much more seriously. How do you employ a lot of people who've lost their jobs? You can carry on giving them some kind of income through welfare payments, in putting them on a reserve employment list and so on, which is what happened. But unless you produce income that is going to be fairly regular and is going to keep people above the poverty line, then you can have all kinds of stress, movement for migration, for example, much more reliance on the unaudited economy, the informal economy, even corruption. Because if corrupt leaders can control employment, then it's much more difficult to get rid of corruption, because people have an interest in that kind of employment continuing when there is nothing else. So that, what I would say, was the main thing that they got wrong. And if a state enterprise is viable, then it could have been resurrected. For example, the railways infrastructure is very, very slow to get going again. It is beginning to get going again now, but very, very slow to develop any infrastructure projects. And these may well have absorbed a lot of unemployment. But for a long time you had people living on the breadline or below it. Too much emphasis on microcredit, which has not fed into the wider economy. I think one of the problems with microcredit, as Milford Bateman points out in his book on this issue, is that it adds to mini enterprises that are not integrated with the rest of the economy, so they don't feed into larger enterprises that might be able to compete internationally, for instance. And what has often been the case is that people use microcredit for personal consumption rather than for production activities. And so, for example, they might buy a wedding suit if it's needed, rather than buy something that can be considered an economic investment. Because most of the money in microcredit is made by the agents and the banks who lend the money. They're the ones who are desperate to get people signed up. I'm not saying that all microcredit fails, but is often such a low level and so non-strategic that it doesn't actually do very much good. and some kind of industrial and agricultural strategy, depending on the country involved, is also very important. If you haven't got a strategy for industrial or agricultural development, then you're not going to be able to produce a development plan. One of the things that strikes me is that at the state level in Bosnia and Herzegovina there is no minister, or I'm not sure that there is a minister for industry or a minister for agriculture. There is for the entities, but not at state level. So that indicates to me that they're not taking it seriously enough.
And the importance of the economy for peace to be truly sort of self-perpetuating, if you will, for peace to be sustainable. Do you think that it's within the legitimacy and within the mandate of the UN to get involved with thoroughly? Or do you think that maybe at least according to the Charter, the UN should be more limited in its intrusion of sovereignty and say, okay, we just come to say we stand between the parties and then it's up to them.
Mm-hmm. That is an interesting point of view, and it's one for which I have a certain amount of sympathy, because if you do intrude and intervene in considerable detail, then you really do have to understand the culture that you're dealing with. You have to engage local people to a much greater extent, and not just the political elite who've won or lost the war, that lost the conflict.